Hi, today we're going to talk about rook pawns. And rook pawns are just like any other pawn. They have to obey the rule of the square and they can't be blockaded by the enemy king. Here, the black king is obviously in the rule of the square because it's in the square, so it needs to be protected by the white king. But the problem with rook pawns is not only is there going to be a blockade here, but there's another resource that the black king can use, and that's that the black king only has to stay on A8 and B8 if the pawn is on the A file, or H8 and G8 if the pawn is on the H file. And why is that? Well, let's see what happens. So the pawn is going to march up, and I'm just going to move back and forth while they both march up, the white king and the black and the white pawn. I'm just going to move back and forth, and right here you can see that they cannot make any more progress. If the pawn goes to A7, then it's stalemate, and the white king can't go anywhere else. If it goes to C7, then king A7, and I'm going to capture the pawn. Now that's the point that if you play A7 here, if this pawn was in the center of the board or even one rank to the right, then the king has to go to A7. Now there is no way for the black king to move out the way, so that's why it's a draw. And that's the resource that the black king has, is that his blockade becomes much stronger because he's not forced to move out of the way at the end. And we'll go to this position, which is just goes to show that no matter how many pawns you have, if the black king can't move out of A8 or B8, then he's toast. So the white king's gonna try to march up and go right there. Now if we push a pawn here, then the king has to go back to A8. So after A7, king A8, and if we go king A6, it's stalemate. So we have to give up this pawn. So what's funny is that the black king doesn't even have to capture the pawn. It can go here, and after, for example, A6, king A8, and now we can actually force this king to take the pawn. After king C6, king takes A7, and then king B5, king A8, king B6, king B8, king A7, king A8, and nothing's gonna happen. It's gonna be stalemate all over again. King B5, king B7, A5, king A8, and it's just the same thing, really. He's gonna give up all of his pawns, and nothing is gonna happen. For example, after A6, it's stalemate, so we can't push that pawn up there. After king B6, it's stalemate. This would definitely work if it was one rank to the right. So that's what the problem is with rook pawns. You can even have a bishop of the opposite color, and over here it's the bishop of the same color, so you can use it to drive it out of the corner. So after bishop E4 check, king B8, A7, and then king C8, the pawn promotes. But this isn't a piece endings, but just goes to show that if you had a bishop on F6 instead of G6, for example, there's no way you can drive it out of the corner. So let's take a look. After this position, we have bishop D4, because if bishop E5, it's stalemate. So that's the problem. If this was in the center of the board, the position, then the king just moves to the left and everything's fine. But with the rook pawns, you have a really strong blockade for the defending side to break. So after bishop D4, king B8, and if bishop E5, check, then king a8 again, and there's no way to make any progress. So that's known as a draw also if you have a bishop of the wrong color. The bishop has to control the corner square, and here it doesn't, so that's another drawing opportunity to consider. And the other way to draw is if you trap the king in his own A rank or H rank. So right here it's white to move it. King a6, not king b4, because then king a5, a5, king c5, and then king b7, and the pawn promotes. But instead you would play after king a6, king c6, and it's no man's land barrier again. So this white king is blocked from even getting out, and if the white king can't get out of the pawn's way, it can't promote. So that's one way to stop it from promoting. And if it was black to move, then we just go ahead and do the same resource. We go to the corner, and if the white king tries to copy us, well, it's no use to him, because then we'll move right here to king c5, although king c7 also works, because after king a7, then king c6, and if a5, then king c7, and we are on par with the white king, and it's never going to get out. Also, after king b5, we just go in the corner and everything is good to go. So as long as you can trap it in its own rank, then it can get out the way for the pawn to move forward and promote. So for example, here it's more in the middle of the board, and after king a6, this pawn's going to promote king c6, and then king b5, king c7, king a7, and this pawn is a guaranteed promoter. So here is another situation where black to move doesn't, well, actually it's white to move here, and if it was black to move, then we don't go king b4, because that's what you've seen. Then a5, and then king b6, and then the pawn promotes. So we just have to move to king c6 and keep right in front of the king. So white to move actually has no hope here, because king a5 blockades himself, and then king c6, and then king a6, and it's the same position as we've seen before. King a7, king a7, and then we just go back down. And it's interesting to note that king c8 also works, because after a5, then king c7 and the blockade is still there. So after king b7, we just play king b4 and we just capture the pawn. Right here it's black to move, and there's only one move for black. Now, are we in the square of the pawn? There's 4 squares there and 4 squares that way. Yes, we're in the square of the pawn. That's good. And let's say we try to go to just chase a pawn by normal means. Well, that's not going to work, because after king b6, king b4, a5, the pawn's going to promote, and there's a barrier that protects this pawn and prevents the black king from even touching the pawn. So we have to definitely stop that from happening. King b6. The only way to prevent king b6 is king c5, and now this square is inaccessible to the white king. And we're also going to threaten king b4 and capturing this pawn right here. So he has 2 choices. He can play king a6, because if king b7, king b4 like we saw before, king a6, king c6, so that doesn't work. But if he plays a5, then we can play king c6, and after king b8, it's the same thing as before. One thing you can't play here is king b5. That's a total blunder, because after a6, then king c6, king b8, the pawn promotes. And over here it's black to move, but black isn't going to save himself, because after they'll only move king c3, king b5. As we saw before, this would normally capture the pawn after king b2, but pawns are really jubilant when they start out. They haven't moved, they have so much energy pent inside them. They're not tired from all the marching, so they can just launch forward and this pawn's going to promote. So the final position is this one, where it's white to move, because if it was black to move, then king c4, and then we can either run to the corner and sit there, or we could blockade the pawn, whichever one. But normally I just sit in the corner, and it's easiest and I don't have to think about it. So the only way to stop that is king b3, and that prevents this king from even getting into the A and B ranks. So this king will never, this black king will never touch these two ranks, these two files. So king d4, king b4, king d5, king b5, king d6, king b6. So that's the idea, is to prevent this black king from getting into these two files, because then he'll just get into the corner and we don't want that. So he decides he's going to go for the pawn, but that's not going to work, because after a4, king c4, a5, this pawn's going to promote. So that's all you really need to consider for rook pawns. Just a little tricky. So all you have to do if you're defending is just to get in the corner and just sit there. And you can also prevent the pawn from advancing if you are able to just trap the king in front of the pawn if in the A rank, because if it can't get out the A rank, then it can't get out of the way of the pawn and it can't promote. So if you like this video, make sure to give it a like, and also feel free to donate. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching.